Welcome back to the On Adventure podcast. I'm Josh Self, and I'll be your host today. My guest today is Robbie Lenfestey. Robbie is one of the most interesting people that I've ever come across, and you'll soon find out why in our conversation. You also may recognize that we point out the fact that this is the second take of our interview. I was very disappointed after the first conversation that we had to find out that the audio from Zoom did not take very well, and there was no way to repair it. So we tried again, and this time I made the trip up to the mountains outside of Asheville, North Carolina, to his property called Mandala Springs. And it is a magical place tucked back up in the hills below Craggy Gardens and some of the more famous areas around Asheville. Robbie comes to the conversation with literally a world of experience. And some of the stories are really hard to believe, just unreal, from being kidnapped in Argentina to becoming one of the youngest people to climb Aconcagua, to also meeting the famous breath expert Wim Hof. And those were just in his 20s. Now in his 40s, Robbie has taken those experiences and has worked very, very hard to turn that into wisdom. And he is generous in sharing that wisdom in the conversation today. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Robbie Lenfestey. Robbie Lenfestey, welcome to the On Adventure podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
You were trying to convince me a minute ago that I'm now an adventure influencer. I don't know about that. I do see myself becoming an adventure story capturer. I don't know if that's even a word. But and what most people aren't going to know this is part due. We tried this once and Zoom or my computer failed us, which was really, really sad to me because the conversation was pretty amazing. And I thought about it for days after that. And so I'm excited we get to do this again. And we are not on Zoom anymore. I'm actually here present with you at Mandala. Did I say it right?
Mandala.
I didn't get it right. Mandala Springs. And we're going to talk more about that. But I'm super excited to be here and really appreciate your graciousness to do this a second time.
Oh, I'm happy to. I love talking about this stuff. So
cool.
Not a problem at all to sit down and talk about the adventure.
Yep. So I do like to start from the very beginning because I think all of us get to wherever we're at in life. You know, it's never a straight line, but there's always, we can look back at the mile markers that point in a general direction. So it's usually interesting to see what childhood was like for folks, and tell folks, anybody listening, who you are, a little bit about yourself, and then kind of jump into that of what your youth was like growing up.
Well, I grew up in a world where, just for context, my parents started off with as close to essentially nothing as you could get. And over the course of my childhood, they built a really comfortable lifestyle over time. So all of my material needs, even when we had next to nothing and it was my mom home alone with 3 babies, essentially, me and my sisters all a year apart, I've never wanted for any material needs. And that's a really amazing thing to be able to say in this world. And I'm really grateful for that. But on the sort of emotional, spiritual, creative side of things, the world that we came from didn't really have the tools to deal with a feral, creative creature like myself, because that's really the essence that I came with. I found myself as a child not being accepted by anything from teachers to my parents to anyone for my behavior and strategy and the way that I function in the world, because it was very different than the other kids around me. I had no propensity to sit still. I didn't really have a lot of attention span, so to speak, to really just sit down, be quiet, and listen and learn. I was very active and always looking for more. I was also very curious and tactile in my learning. So once you get into the school system where you're sitting at a desk and it's all very mental and learning from someone sitting there in front of you teaching you, that stuff was miserable to me. And so the penning that up and that being pent up came out sideways in lots of different ways. And so I was constantly in trouble. It was constantly looked at as a behavioral issue. And now these days, what I love seeing is that like my nieces and nephews, I have the similar kind of personality. The school systems understand the differences in the way that different kids come in, and they've got lots of tools now to really help kids to excel. We did not have that back in the day. So
you were square peg round hole.
Yep, exactly. And so really this created a lot of pretty intense trauma in my system, because as a little child, the dominant message that I got from the world around me is that I was fundamentally flawed.
Yeah.
That there was something wrong with me, just with how and who I am, and that I didn't fit in. And so I embodied all of that. So I found myself to be a very socially awkward, eager to please, I was very easy to use and abuse.
Yeah.
And ultimately it spiraled even deeper to once I was a teenager, I gained a lot of weight. I had no real friends. I ended up getting to a point where I really just hated my life. I hated school. I hated the social situation. I hated my body. I had no semblance of self-love or security in myself. I was like very insecure. Like you look at all the pictures of me from then, all my arms would be crossed to try and hide my fat at that time, just very insecure child. And so, I started to really become more self-destructive in high school specifically. I started using drugs. I started skipping a lot of school. I was just hanging out with people that were really on the most self-destructive trajectories. And I really just did not have a good time. I did not enjoy anything.
I think it's interesting too, what you're just saying, as any child doesn't have the brain hasn't developed enough to process the information they're getting from adults in an appropriate way. Meaning you didn't get that information and then turn around and say, you guys are wrong. You took that information and said, they must be right. They know more than I do. And then it becomes this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy of you living up to that low standard of yourself. Is that a good description?
That is a perfect description.
Okay.
And that is exactly what happened. And so I got to the point where I literally hated my life. I had like preferential thoughts of not living at that point. Definitely some suicidal thoughts at that point in my life. And even some moments where I made very weak attempts at taking my own life that only further make me feel worse about myself, because I didn't even have enough courage to do that. It was a whole mess. And then really just stopped caring about anything. Didn't go to school, didn't care about my grades, didn't care about anything. I was taking all these AP classes because I was still brilliant in that I still had the intellectual piece, but I was not showing up. I think at one point I didn't show up to a single class for 2 weeks straight. Went to school every day, didn't show up to a single class for 2 weeks.
That takes some intention.
Yes. It was definitely a thing, and eventually it reached a fever pitch, literally. And I felt ill. And it's funny because there was a moment where my father thought that I was overreacting to this illness. And to his credit, at that point, he knew that last thing I want to be is at school. As far as he can see from his perspective, it's like I'm just making all these terrible decisions. So then I get this illness, and he's pissed at me. I think it was even a thing where I had gone to a friend's house. I was drinking alcohol. I locked my keys in my car. He had to come and pick me up that same day. So he was pissed already for good reason. And then I'm starting to talk about I have this headache, and he's like, just get over it. Yeah. But I actually had meningitis.
Oh, geez.
And luckily, my mom convinced him to have me go to the emergency room. And they got me there, and under the fluorescent lights, I had the light sensitivity. My head, I've never had a headache like that in my life. Never felt anything like that. My whole body was covered in red spots. And that was when they put two and two together. And before they could give me any sort of like relief from that pain, they had to do spinal taps on me. And they had to stab me in the back basically without anesthetic. And so it was a very miserable moment. And then I was in the hospital for a while. And whether I was going to live or die was a question in that moment. And so there's a lot of information. And anyone who pays attention knows that it's like there's a spiritual, emotional component to illness. Physical illness doesn't just exist in a vacuum. Yeah. It's an extension of our whole being. And they've even written books on this. And Louise Hay is a famous author. She actually has a publishing company that publishes a lot of these self-help books. But her book, How to Heal Yourself, I believe, in the back, there's a list of all these diseases, and it gives you the spirit, like kind of the emotional, mental, spiritual implications of what's going on in someone's life.
Gotcha.
And usually there's like a paragraph for each. But for meningitis, there's just 3 words. And it was extreme self-hatred.
Oh my gosh.
Extreme self-hatred. So accurate. But what's really fascinating and what's really fun about this is this whole childhood not being understood, not having any context for my personality to thrive in, and all of this like nihilism and just desire to like just complete lack of concern. All of the self-recrimination and sort of the depression and everything got burnt away with that disease. It's the best way I can describe it.
Like immediate? You got better and that stuff was gone?
Pretty immediately. I didn't know how to interact with it at first. So this was right before. This was literally at the end of my senior year. So I went from that disease into that summer in between high school and college. And I just felt liberated. But I had not gained back any of that lack of nihilism.
Okay. All right.
I didn't gain back any of that. So as soon as I got to Appalachian State in Boone, North Carolina, within 24 hours, I discovered rock climbing. And it was literally within hours of getting to the dorm, the first moments when I get dropped off, somebody asked me, it's like, you want to go bouldering? Do you like bouldering? And I just imagined somebody jumping across the rocks, and I was like, "Yeah, I love that." It's like, do you have?
Yeah, I love that. Like,
yeah,
like you've done it your whole life.
I was like, "Yeah, this is my favorite thing ever." And they're like, "Well, do you have bouldering shoes?" I was like, "Oh, okay. This is not what I thought it was." So they got me put into a pair of shoes, and I went bouldering for the first time. And this is 2002. At this point, rock climbing was still very obscure. It was a very small subset community. It hadn't reached this popularity that it knows today. So it was this perfect storm, though, where it's like you're pitting your body against growing technical and nuanced problems. They're boulder problems, like a math problem. And you have to solve the problem. And you have to solve the problem with your own strength, your own courage and willpower, and your own technique and physical capacity to make those slight adjustments to be able to make the next move. And I think what really got me addicted to it was trying to move and being like, that's impossible. That holds way too far away. I can't get to it. Just can't do it. It's like it's outside of my physical capacity. And then you keep trying it anyways, and you keep trying it anyways. And all of a sudden, you just turn your foot ever so slightly. You turn your knee in towards the rock a little bit. All of a sudden, you reach that hold. And you get it. And then after that, you get it every single time. Something that seemed like it was a physical impossibility is somehow possible. And I fell in love with it. And now the 18-year-old high school version of me, 235 pounds, and relatively unhealthy, very quickly lost all the weight. Didn't even think about it. Didn't even realize it or notice it because I was just obsessed.
It's not lost on me, too, that what you described leading up to that was a school system and really a societal system that forced you to get into your head, right? It's all mental. It's all learning. And this movement of your body is bad. It's getting you into trouble. And then the first thing after you feel this sense of healing is that you're using your body.
Exactly.
Like, that's amazing to me.
And reveling. And not only that, but surrounded by like-minded people, creative people, other musicians. I was playing music every day with other musicians, and it's like out of the blue, suddenly there was a not just a justification for my personality and who I was, but there was an entire world that was conducive to it. And the way that this really ties in to the sort of nihilism that I had gained, and you know, basically the lack of concern around my, you know, whether I was still breathing or not, I sort of, everything kind of felt like the bonus round. It's like I had gone through the fire and now everything was bonus round. And all of my climbing friends for that part of my life would be laughing hearing this, because they agree, is I had no like self-preservation instinct or strategy. I was willing to push myself way further and way harder than anyone else around me. And what's funny is, like, I was able to build tremendous strength because a lot of my friends became really good climbers and were able to do really well because they developed really good technique. For years and years, I didn't develop good technique at all, and I just used brute force. I basically brute forced my way into climbing grades that usually require better technique.
I gotcha.
And it took a while to get to that nuanced part, but you know, once I discovered the big cliffs and the tall stuff, I just had a capacity to throw myself lead climbing at things that were beyond my capacity, which meant I was gonna fall. You know, so I would climb things that had very little gear, so there'd be big distance between the last piece of gear and wherever I was, and I'd take these giant falls, and I just loved it.
You lost the inhibition to worry about physical harm to yourself post meningitis. Do you think it was a subconscious effort to actually do harm to yourself? Just a quick interruption here to say that if you're enjoying these conversations, jump over to my website, www.ridgelinewealthadvisors.com, and that's advisors with an ORS, and there you can sign up for my monthly newsletter, The Money Trail Guide. You'll find more information in line with how you can pursue your great adventure now and all the things that go into planning and funding something like that. With that, let's jump back into the conversation. Do you think it was a subconscious effort to actually do harm to yourself?
Not even slightly. Okay,
all right.
At this point in time, I was so in love with my life. I was in love with everything around me, but I just didn't have the fear of pushing the next edge that a lot of people would have.
What do you attribute that to?
I mean, I do attribute it to spending the majority of my life with this capacity and this aspect of myself pretty pent up, not getting to express itself very often. And when I could express it, in those rare moments when I had the opportunity to express it and it worked, it was invigorating. But also, I think that a lot of it was I had a lot to prove to myself. So I even though I was loving my life, still very insecure, still a lot of imposter syndrome, still a lot of feeling like I was this inherent failure still. So I really pushed myself in rock climbing because I was excelling. I was gaining a lot of respect and notoriety in this community, and I was succeeding. And so I had a lot emotionally on the line at that time with rock climbing. So there was a ferocity to my capacity to push myself and to grow stronger and stronger and to just try crazier things, which is why I found myself trying, cliffs that had never been climbed before, for example, like, picking a line that had never been climbed up a rock face and climbing it. And I would do some free solo rock climbing where I didn't take ropes at all on things that I felt confident with, things that I felt that I could do. And then one very specific example, I was with a dear friend who lives in Asheville now, is actually still one of my good friends. And we scoped out this line in this crazy gorge out in Panthertown Valley in the Nantahala National Forest called, it's Bonus Defeat. And this is this very canyon-like gorge, and there's this 400-foot vertical granite rock face that just rises out of it. There's this prominence right in the middle, and we looked at it with binoculars and we're like, this is great, we're gonna climb this. No one's ever climbed this line before. And of course I'm on the sharp end, as always. My friend's belaying me.
What does that mean?
On the sharp end means I'm the one on the lead. Okay. So I had all the gear on me. So I had, my harness with all the gear so that I could climb it safely. And we had seen all these horizontal cracks that looked like they'd be perfect to just put gear in. But I get up there and all of these horizontal cracks aren't actually cracks. The shadow made it seem like they were. They were these little flaring shelves that had nowhere to put gear. And so I'm climbing, and I'm actually climbing very close to my limit. Like, I'm climbing something right now that is challenging me, and I'm having to wipe all of the sand and lichen off of the holds because there's very few holds. There's not much to grab onto. It's very frictiony. It's very much balance, and I'm trusting the friction of my hands and the friction of the rubber on my climbing shoes to keep me on the rock. And I'm going higher and higher and higher. And I realize after a certain point, it's like, well, each move is so precarious. I can't down climb this.
Oh my gosh.
I can't go back the way I came. This is not the kind of thing you can down climb. It just doesn't, you can't go backwards. And I just I got to keep climbing up. And then I get to the end of my rope. So now my person who's belaying me, my friend, he's way down there. He can't hear me from where I am. And I'm starting to tug on him. So generally the way you communicate in those situations is 3 good, strong tugs. Means I've got an anchor built, you're on belay now you can climb behind and clean up all the gear, and I've got you on a top rope. And I've got a good, solid anchor up top. So I know this. And he's not as strong of a climber as I am, at this point at least. And I realize that he's down there cleaning up the anchor and he's about to start climbing behind me, and that there is no choice right now, but I have to wait for him to make moves. Now he thinks he's on top rope. That means his mentality is that he's safe.
He's safe.
He can be careless. He can climb, he doesn't have to be on point, but I'm still barely balanced on the rock making the next move. So I have to wait. I have to just sit there on the rock face, losing energy as I go, wait for him to make a few moves, then I can make the next few moves. And it's so scary because I can remember the hard sections. So I reach, after a certain point of me getting higher, I'm like, man, he's probably getting right to these crux moves right now. And I just had to stay focused. Wow. And there's no room. The thing about that kind of situation is there's no fear. There can't be. I believe this is I'm not sure if this is something that is natural for everyone, but at least at a certain point, if you put yourself in a situation where there is no way out but through, there's the biological propensity and capacity for fear disappears, because at that point you are pure embodied focus. It's actually very much like a Zen state. It's very much like what people seek in meditation and seek through different kinds of spiritual practices, which I highly advise because it's a significantly safer way to get into that state. But it's also, by placing oneself in these kinds of situations, certainly is a fast track to being able to develop that skill very quickly. And so, he'd climb a little bit, I'd go a little further. I finally got to a place where I could get to a tree, grab onto it, hold on tight. He keeps climbing. Thankfully, he doesn't fall. I put myself on the other side of the tree, and then I'm safe, because now I've got the leverage of the tree in between us. And as he climbs a little more, I get that extra rope. I create a real anchor. Then I actually put him on belay so that he's now climbing safely. And he gets up. I remember when he gets up to the point where I can see his face, he's like, all the blood is drained from his face and he's wide-eyed. Because at that point, he had put it all, he knew, because he thinks he's going to be cleaning up all my gear.
And there's no gear.
And there's no gear. There's no gear. There was nowhere to place any gear on that whole head wall. Beautiful head wall. So if people would climb that today, they would generally bolt it. They would actually be drilling bolts into the rock that you're clipping into.
Okay.
Is how this kind of climb would be done. Though in North Carolina, if you do it, quote unquote, traditionally from the ground up, then technically no one is allowed to bolt it unless you give them permission to, if you were the first. So I called that one, the name of that one is a question. It's lithophilia or lycophobia. So is it for the love of stone or the fear of lichen? and it has an X rating, so it's got the number, the traditional 5, I think it was like 511D or 512A, something like that. By North Carolina standards, X, meaning no fall. So that's just an example, an early example of me finding myself literally pitted with a mortal dilemma and being able to bear witness to how my nervous system responds to that kind of situation.
So there was some self-learning, self-knowledge that came out of that you weren't aware of potentially before this climb. What else did you discover from being in such a precarious position?
Well, I discovered that, first and foremost, that you can't just look at a thing with binoculars and see features that really do seem like they would be perfect. From the ground level, it looked like there was limitless places to put gear. It looked like it would be incredibly safe. But we get up there and there are these flaring shelves that have no place for gear. Learned that was a very naive operational strategy, initiatory strategy for that. Never did that again. Never went and looked at a climb and just decided that it would probably be okay. And also just really, really learned that in those kinds of situations, and then I also had previous evidence, because I had pushed a lot of these boundaries in different ways before this moment. This was sort of at that time, a kind of culminating extreme of that experience. But I realized that I don't need to necessarily go to that extreme. It's like there's a difference between free solo rock climbing something that you feel confident with, because then there's actually a lot of control. You go and climb something where it's got great holds, everything's strong, it's well within your capacity. You climb enough, it feels like walking. It has a similar proprioceptive connection to any other kind of movement you do. You climb enough, it becomes a natural part of who you are. So like any other primate, it's like, I'll go and climb that rock face. Maybe it's 500 feet of this grade that I feel comfortable with, and I don't feel like I'm out of control or that I'm putting my life on the line in that situation.
It seems like at least in these stories so far, there was some intentionality about pushing the limit of what you were capable of. And then there was some, as you put it, naivety of just how extreme you were finding yourself. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yes, yeah. Absolutely.
And continue forward as you go into other activities. And I'd like for you to talk to a little bit about this, the comfort zone and the growth zone. And how, of course, this plays into these kind of pushing the limits play into that. But you obviously didn't go hole up, get so scared that you withdraw and never do something that extreme again. So what did you do with that after you completed that climb?
Yeah, that is a really good question. The key here is understanding kind of the range between your comfort zone and where you go and kill yourself. And this is something that I did not understand at the time. I was actively doing this without having the conscious tools to be able to describe what it was and how it worked. And the tools actually help modulate what we end up putting ourselves through at the end of the day. So you imagine you've got this line, and in it you've got your comfort zone, and then right outside your comfort zone you have your growth zone. Right outside of your growth zone, you have what is the trauma zone. And past the trauma zone is injury and death. So say you spend your whole life just living inside your comfort zone and you never really push into that growth zone. Well, slowly over time, that comfort zone is going to shrink. It's It's going to shrink more and more. Your mind is going to atrophy, your body's going to atrophy, your sense of what you can do and what you can step into is going to slowly shrink. And you find yourself with a more and more limited range of what situations and experiences you feel comfortable with. Mm-hmm. And this goes for anyone. So the growth zone is where you are choosing, or sometimes not choosing. Actually, a lot of times in life, for a lot of humans on this planet, they don't have any choice at all. Yeah. You know, if you're in a war zone and you're getting bombs are falling on your family and you're watching people die, you don't get a choice in this. But it is when we are either by choice in a privileged situation or not, are forced outside of our comfort zone, that will invariably increase the size of our comfort zone. Now, if you're really trying to grow, you're earnest about growing your comfort zone, if you push a little too far past that growth zone, then you enter into what we call the trauma zone, where you have an experience that is traumatic, that creates a negative imprint on the mind and the body. And we're really well designed for that. You know, we're neurologically designed so that if you put your hand in the fire and take it out, you've wired a very strong synapse that basically makes it so you don't have to reach your hand into the fire twice. Mm-hmm. You get it. You know that that's not good. So you've had this traumatic experience that wires conditioned behavior very strongly. Generally speaking, we know that for any given traumatic experience, if you want to undo that conditioning, requires at least 10 times as many growth experiences in the same vein to be able to successfully unwire a single traumatic experience if you catch it right away. If you don't, if you just continue to live life with that trauma, it can become even more complicated because then it becomes a part of your personality, becomes a part of your lifestyle. If you're aware of it and catch it, it can still take 10 times to get rid of that mental physiological aversion. So this is really important, but the key is if you don't ever go into that trauma zone, then you don't actually know how wide your growth zone is. And if you're really testing your growth zone, you're going to have little, at least small brushes with the trauma zone, and you understand them to be what they are and you respond accordingly. But what's really cool in this process is that over time, your comfort zone can literally grow to, in certain areas of your life, to be well beyond what would have actually killed you at a different point in your life or would kill somebody else. So this is a field that you can stretch. So where my growth zone is relative to someone who's never done any of that growing could very well be in the realm of something that would create significant trauma or kill them. And a great example of this is the Wim Hof method and the cold training that I trained with Wim Hof directly and became one of his first instructors in the US. And by the end of that, instruction, some of the things that I was doing, some of the experiences I had with cold exposure would be deadly to someone who hadn't trained their comfort zone and their growth zone to a state where those practices are comfortably encompassed within it.
I've heard other people describe it as a window of tolerance. And the only way to stretch that window of tolerance is to continually push out into the things that are uncomfortable until they're not uncomfortable anymore.
Exactly.
And I'm not sure I'm going to put the words together correctly, but where my mind goes is I think this is super fascinating, and it's very clear in your life work as well. But evolutionarily, as we said before, as animals, the human being only does things that have rewards and that have a purpose, right, to the existence of the species. And you would think logically that staying safe would be a good thing. But what you're describing is that the more safe we are, legitimately, maybe the less safe we become. But it's a nice edge that between we can't stay in our safe little containment box because that will eventually kill us. I think in terms of, I can't think of the guy's name right now, but it was in the 90s. A kid walked into Alaska and ended up dying in a bus in the middle of nowhere because he had broken his leg. But he was safe in the bus, right? But he stayed there too long, and he had a broken leg. He couldn't get out, but he died in the safety of that bus, and you could say that was a comfort zone.
And sadly, he wasn't far. He was only a few miles from a bridge that could get him out of there.
Not far. Incredible story. Very, very sad. But I think of that as the illustration of this, strangely, as a safe zone in comparison to what you're describing as the human being has to push the limit, because if not, we're going to stay stuck in that safe zone. But if we push it too far, we're dead.
Yep.
We're in the death zone. So I guess my question to you in how do you continue to find that knife's edge?
It's a great question. And honestly, I think really the evolutionary reason why this matters is the single most important trait for the survival of any species is adaptability.
Yeah.
And so if you find a little situation, say you're like a caveman and your cave family, they found this sweet little situation where you got this spring right here and all the food you need in this one little spot, and you spend a few generations not needing to work at all for food and water, and it's just taken care of, and then you guys get fat and happy and lazy, and your life is great. But then suddenly those sources of sustenance disappear, you die because you've atrophied your capacity for adaptability. And adaptability, once you're no longer talking about rote survival, when you're talking about the world of business and innovation and being able to meaningfully move the lever of culture through your activities and what you're creating, adaptability is the most important skill. It's how you can perceive the opportunities for advancement, for innovation, for creating something that is needed but doesn't exist yet. And it's that quote where they say, brilliance is the capacity to see a goal and to hit it, to hit a goal that can be seen. Genius is the capacity to see a goal that nobody else can see and hit it.
Yeah.
And that to me is the adaptability. And so to answer your question, the way that you keep finding the capacity to step into the growth zone, to step into that edge zone, is through coming into some sort of internal understanding of the value and the leverage that it's giving your life. In term, because we were talking about rock climbing, tremendous physical capacity, the ability to move. You develop competency in the rope systems, in ice climbing, in mountaineering, snow and ice systems, rock systems, all of it. You suddenly have the physical capacity to basically go anywhere on Earth. There's any environment is available to you. And so there's that level of adaptability. But in doing so, you're simultaneously expanding your capacity to weather the storm of startup entrepreneurship. And a lot of the overwhelming stress and the financial issues and the struggles and the failures and all of the things that go with entrepreneur lifestyle, you now find yourself at a very different level of capacity to mitigate what would be really major and overwhelming stressors for someone else. Once you have placed yourself in some of the kinds of situations I have, which the rock climbing story is only one of them in my life journey, and there's a lot of them. I'm grateful that I get to be here to tell this story. Once you've experienced a lot of things that are actually mortally acute in this way, when running out of money or a project failing or some of the things that would be really impactful for someone else don't have nearly as much gravity or weight in the context of the expanded comfort zone.
Yeah, so you pick up the life skill or that ability on a rock face, but it translates into every other area of your life, including business. That's really fascinating. I've never thought about it in those terms. And as you have success in business and do harder things that I mean, the fact is most small businesses fail within 3 years.
Yes.
Large majority of them. And if you can sustain that grind, you're doing something that most people can't. That also, I'm sure, gives some gravity back to the things that you do in the outdoors to try harder and harder things. Is it kind of that symbiotic relationship between them?
It is for me, and it can be for anyone. The biggest difference is being able to bridge that gap of understanding the relationship between the two.
Is that just a level of consciousness to make that connection, or how do you do that?
It is really a choice, and it can be as simple as someone hearing these words and suddenly connecting the dots and realizing that this tremendous skill and expansion that they've created in their comfort zone in this one avenue of their lives is actually directly applicable and will have benefit to other aspects of their lives. And a lot of people won't make that leap. A lot of rock climbers will find that growth edge, and they will push that growth edge to its limits. But if they're confronted with the opportunity to push a growth edge around, say, their own trauma responses and attachment strategies, their emotional intelligence and their capacity to share their feelings and feel their feelings and things like that, they will freeze. They won't touch
completely
it.
off limits.
Completely off limits.
Interesting.
So you can make the choice to really just pick a lane and then develop that one out without needing to bridge the gap into the holistic adaptability that's actually available. But for me, that's where the real magic exists, is when you start cross-applying these skill sets and realizing that all of this work that I've done in mountaineering and rock climbing, living in third world countries, going through wild experiences, climbing some of the biggest mountains in the world, things of that nature, directly actually gives me creative juice as a musician. Me being a musician and me being a rock climber directly has affected my understanding of systems. And then that's helped me to have a very unique relationship. I teach people about ecosystem fluency. I'm pretty comprehensively, educated in ecology in general, but Appalachian ecology specifically. And all of these systems have helped me to be able to look at the natural systems from a different perspective. It's given me a different peripheral vision. Like the more you can look at your comfort zone, like periphery, like you're climbing up the mountain of comfort zone. And as you climb up the mountain, when you look out, you can see a wider horizon. You can see more of the playing field. You can see more of the parts creating a whole, which then translates for me into my businesses and the need and desire to create like the most healthy chocolate that has ever existed, to work with wild herbs and mushrooms, to work with regenerative, like population growth in the natural world, things like that, to build a retreat center that's dedicated to holistic human empowerment, to attract the kinds of people who understand these things, to create a human system and a human ecosystem that is able to do significantly more than any single part would be able to do by themselves, which is the nature of any scaling business or entity. The capacity to do it at a certain uncompromised level of integrity comes from that expanded growth zone. I don't feel a need to compromise in order to make safe choices in the growth of my business, because I've already gotten past that point in the courage. So I'm willing to create something that is of maximum integrity and face the short-term economic and cyclical repercussions of that in order to continue to build something that has a value system that I believe in. And that is 100% because of all of this crazy stuff that I did earlier on in my life.
I think some would say it, simply, that's what you call perspective, right? It gives you I think it's more than that though. I mean, I read into all that is a fully integrated life.
Yes.
And personally, that's a goal, that there are no silos. There's no one thing that I do that doesn't impact other areas of life. And I can say that in my head, but to actually live it out in the way that you described is very hard, because I think there is an element of consciousness and mentally bridging that gap that's really, really hard to do. It's not maybe as natural for everyone as you make it. Maybe it's not natural for you, but you make it, the intentionality of it, seem very doable. We could almost put a bow on the conversation right there and just like mic drop, because that's beautiful. That is like the culmination of why I want to talk to adventurers. What do we get from pushing the limits and finding out what we see on the other side about ourselves, about the universe, about other people? That was brilliantly put. But I'm not going to let you off the hook, because you got too many other things that I do know about that we need to tell folks about. So I'm going to bring us back to Boone.
Okay.
Tell me what you were studying while you were in college.
I was studying, so I first went thinking I was going to do pre-med, and then immediately found sustainable development, which was a pretty relatively new concept at the time. And it spoke to me and lit up my enthusiasm. And it was all about creating new systems in the world based on integrity. We had sustainability then. Now it's really about regenerative. Creating regenerative systems, creating a culture that is inherently regenerative, creating a culture that where kids are being raised with their emotional intelligence intact and being able to express their feelings easily. And they understand how to interact with each other in healthy ways. And you have parents who have enough of this capacity that you're able to really see the specific nuances of the skills that these kids have, like the things that they love, and cultivate that, and creating a very different cultural system than the one that we grew up in. And different relationship to our food, working with the wild foods, growing as much of our own food as possible, being aware of the fact that healthy soil microbiology makes a huge difference in the health and vitality that we're able to receive from the food that we're eating, drinking the best water that exists, things like this. So sustainable development introduced me to all of these concepts. And so I ended up focusing on agroecology, and specifically silviculture, the agricultural use of the wild populations, and doing wild simulated growth of medicinal herbs like ginseng and things like that in the intact forest ecosystem, and being able to show people the economic value that exists in the intact forest ecosystem, and that by allowing it to reach its full maturity, you're actually creating the maximum opportunity for the greatest amount of regenerative resource.
So give me an example of where that's played out.
Mandala Springs, where we are sitting right now, this is my beautiful land project here, about 80 acres, national forest on 3 sides. And it is a certified organic forest farm. And the certified organic is so that I can utilize some of the plants and mushrooms in my certified organic chocolate. And
so this property is the best example of what you just described then.
Exactly.
Yeah. So where my mind goes, though, is how do you marry the capitalist culture of, I guess our food production is within that, right? Because I could see where it could get bastardized. Like, yes, let the forest grow. And then how do you let capitalism come in and still keep the ecosystem intact, but get out of it something that is beneficial for the human consumer?
Yeah, this is a great question. And it's really educating people on the solutions to every problem that actually exist. It's like when they come and cut down our national forest, for example, it's not like they're using that for dimensional lumber and beautiful slabs and stuff. They're literally grinding all these hardwoods into pulp to make toilet paper. So there's not a mature understanding of what is necessary to create a really truly regenerative world. And part of the fact that we have a society that has inherently created the narrowest comfort zone possible. Like every comfort that we could ever hope for is given to us in spades. Mm-hmm. And you can choose in this culture to become very insulated from anything uncomfortable or sitting out of the reality, which we now know leads to all the mental illness and a dependency on pharmaceuticals. It doesn't actually create a healthy ecosystem.
But again, the safer we get, the more comfortable we get, the more harm it does to the human species.
So it's really easy to just continue to live in the world that is being provided. You don't have to care about where the toilet paper came from. You don't have to care where the food was grown. You don't have to care how it was grown. You just keep living life, wake up every day and just keep doing the thing. And it functions. If not well, it functions. Mm-hmm. And people are so used to it that they don't even know what it feels like to thrive. They don't even know what it feels like to have your creativity and your capacity to move, function, create, think, and do things any way that you can imagine. Mm-hmm. They don't know what it's even like to have those things turned on. And so they're essentially numb. Mm-hmm. So there's not a problem inherent in capitalism. There's a problem inherent in a culture that puts comfort at all costs on a pedestal and has forgotten the richness that is available to a life that is expanding in its capacity in a multitude of different ways holistically. So when you do that, you gain perspective, as you said. It's all about perspective. You gain peripheral vision. Suddenly, you see where the toilet paper is coming from. You see the detriment that the poisonous foods are creating in the culture. You see the detriment of men not being able to express emotions with any sort of ease, and just all of the different dynamics that are creating like the inherently toxic situations that perpetuate generation after generation. You start to be able to see all of those things in the playing field, and you can see what's beyond that. You have the peripheral perspective, you have the awareness, and you can start making different choices, and you can start becoming, through the vote that you make with the money that you spend, through the community that you create, through the businesses that you create or support, you get to make a different choice. It's like we can create our building materials from hemp and other sustainable sources. You know, we can create all of our plastics from hemp and other sustainable sources. You can grow crops in this intact forest that are tremendously more valuable than anything that you could ever get from this land if you were to cut it down and try and do traditional agriculture of any kind on it. It takes longer. You plant a ginseng crop, you're not going to harvest that any sooner than 10 years from now. But if you plant one every year for 10, by the time you get to 10 years, you've got a new harvest.
Sustainable.
You've got sustainable. In places like Switzerland, they've been planting trees for like over 1,000 years, where they will cut down 350, 400-year-old trees with smiles on their faces because their ancestors planted those trees for them. And for every tree they cut down, they've planted that many more for their ancestors 300, 400 years in the future.
That's cool.
What our culture has lost is because when you get that insular and comfort is everything, you're so numb. You're barely surviving just in your own little world. You're not even capable of stepping back and saying, how does my actions, my lifestyle, my impact, how does this affect and impact people 300 or 400 years from now? Like, am I creating a better world for people 300 or 400 years from now? Or am I just being lazy and kind of taking what I need to survive because I'm stuck in an emotional, spiritual adolescence, basically? Like, most of the adults in our culture are emotional, spiritual adolescents. They don't even have the capacity to understand that they can make choices that are directly impacting many generations forward in this way. It requires stepping out of one's comfort zone. So the people that I know that have the most integrity in terms of the bigger picture of society and culture are the ones who've been willing to push themselves in different ways. And I see that play out in the global community that I'm connected to of anyone who's innovative, of anyone who's pushing the threshold. In some way or another, they've continually made that choice to step into something that they were afraid of or that was uncomfortable, and to keep taking those steps.
I think that's beautifully put. And my question goes to, I think it's amazing that you're doing it on these 80 acres, but it's one thing to do it on 80 acres of land that you own. I guess just very simply, do you think this is scalable to the whole world? Eventually, yes. And it's another one of those things where, like, when you really understand the way that like a forest ecosystem works, you understand that it's a slow process. Mm-hmm. You know, if it's been cut down, it takes hundreds of years for it to come back to maturity. Our culture is the same way. You know, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's got to start with each one of us as individuals and the choices we make. And then you can start to see, as you get more of a strong foundation in yourself and you've expanded your capacity in all these different ways, you start to attract more like-minded people. You start to attract more health and well-being. Your lifestyle speaks for itself. You know, you are the walk of your talk in that regard. Gotcha. And it becomes, as you attract more people like-minded, you start building a community that starts building a culture that then is exponentially more capable of having meaningful and measurable leverage and impact on the rest of the world and the rest of culture. Yeah, and I think people will see in a minute, even more so, how you couldn't have gotten to this understanding and this mature and deep vision for what you see as possible, as you have done several times, tying it back to the continued expansion of your own comfort zone, the continued expansion of your own growth zone. So I keep bringing you back to college. You were in school in Boone studying the things that you just explained, and then you ended up in essentially an internship in South America. Yes. Is that correct? So that ended unexpectedly. Yes. So basically, you know, I was studying sustainable development, studying this stuff, and had to get an internship. And I also had to get foreign languages, and I hated, similar to the high school experience, hated the entire academic strategy of learning a foreign language. Like, very much not the way my brain works. Mm-hmm. I loathed it. I avoided it. And then I got creative. I met the head of foreign language department for a small private university called Lees McRae in Van Elk. Mm-hmm. And I figured out a system with her that I could basically go do my internship in permaculture down in South America. I'd spend 3 months there in this one spot. I'd learn the language. I'd take some tests. I would test out of the need to take all those classes. I loved it. It was one of those, and that's the key. It's like, don't compromise, just find creative solutions. There's always a creative solution, you know? And so that was my creative solution for this. So got my one-way ticket to South America. And yes, this internship I was planning on fully doing, of course, but I knew that I was throwing myself at the big unknown. I was going to a place where I didn't speak the language. I didn't know the culture. It was as far away from home as I'd ever been. I was by myself. No one knew me. And it was this thrilling, terrifying opportunity to throw myself at the world. I took a small drum, a slack line, because I was doing a lot of this as a balancing practice, slacklining, something that I've been teaching actually for a long time now, and a little booklet of photography to trade to people for resources. And I went, and Where in South America did you go?
So I was in Argentina, and I flew into Buenos Aires. Then I took a day's bus down to Patagonia, got on another bus, and then rode that bus for 24 hours. And very quickly, there was no pavement left. It was all dirt roads. They'd stopped the bus, and they had literally gas tanks with hand pumps. They were hand pumping gas into the bus to keep the journey going, and eventually get to the end of the road where there's no longer vehicles or vehicle travel. In fact, very long before that, there's no private vehicles. The bus is the only thing that really uses this road besides horses. And I found myself in the deep Patagonian wilderness in the completely indigenous communities that are horse culture. You know, you turn 13 years old, you're a man, you get your horse. Mm-hmm. You know, everything revolves around horses and goats and cattle herds, and that's the lifestyle there. And it's this wild desert. It's one of the roughest ecosystems on Earth. They say the wind is alive down there because it's just brutal. And there's literally just these little oases where there's spring water coming up that their habitation can exist. Otherwise, it's just this relentless desert. And it's massive and it's cold. I was on the border of Argentina and Chile. And from there, on horseback, had to go off trail and spend an entire day on horseback to get up to a river crossing, do this river crossing, and then get to this place where I was going to do this permaculture internship.
And you found this place online, which fascinates me that somewhere that remote has an online presence.
This guy had one solar panel and a satellite and a computer.
Oh my gosh.
And this was his way of connecting to the outside world. And so he was an American expat that had bought this property. Came to find out this guy was really screwy. He was born in a multimillionaire family, just never had to work a day in his life, married into a billionaire's family, and suddenly had as much resources as he could ever hope for. Bought this, I mean, like 500,000 or 600,000, maybe more, 1,000-acre estancia in Patagonia. He had estancias and villas and things all over the world, private jets, and he was utterly irresponsible, and he was an idiot, and he literally squandered that entire money. He got married 5 times, and then 5 different wives carved out different sections of all of his things till all he was left with was this unbelievably stunning, I think it's 200,000 acre estancia in Patagonia. So this guy was very eccentric. And I get there and I immediately realized that something is
your spidey senses are wrong.
Something is not right. And I thought that I was coming to learn permaculture. He somehow in that whole interaction just wanted me to create permaculture for him.
Oh no.
And I was a student, at the time. He just expected me to take the raw material of this land and make gardens and do a thing. So that was happening, but it was still a beautiful experience. 20 miles of wild Patagonian river, like wild river there in the middle of absolutely nowhere, rough and rugged. It was a beautiful place.
It sounds amazing.
It was incredible. And so this was in between their winter and summer there, where they were moving this massive herd of cattle from the winter part of the ranch to the summer. And they needed more bodies. So they've got this is real cowboy culture. Mm-hmm. These are people who were born and raised on horses. It's their entire lifestyle. And suddenly I'm with these real modern day cowboys. I pray they still exist here 22 mm-hmm. years later, or 20 years later. Mm-hmm. And I am doing a cattle drive. So it's a 10-day cattle drive. We have all of our supplies. And what we're doing is we're going to the winter ranch. And when we get to the winter ranch, it's my turn to slaughter a goat for dinner, and they're not questioning this. There's no question. It's like, do you know how to do this? Have you ever done something like this before? They're like, no, here's the knife. There's the goat. Dig the hole, put the goat's head over the hole and stab it, and you let it bleed out into the hole. You hold it down while it's literally watching its life force go away, and then you butcher it. And they sat there, they were laughing at me, clearly seeing me fumble around, but I'd killed this goat, butchered this goat, strung the goat up over the fire, cooked it. This is what you do.
That's how you exist.
And, these are the kinds of experiences that impact. I was vegetarian for most of my adult life after that. Only just barely recently started eating some meat again, actually. But, it's like that level of impact. I literally killed this animal and then held it down while its life force left its body. It was a wild experience. And so then we drove the cattle to the summer ranch, which brought us close to, we went back to that original town to get a whole supply chain because it's a lot of supplies that need to go to the ranch. And so we had all these mules packed up to the brim, and we were headed back to the ranch. And it's, Patagonian wilderness, it gets dark, it's immediately frigid, and there's that wind, and it's this exposed mountainous desert landscape. It's brutal. So it's getting close to dark. We had gotten a late start, and the gauchos that I was with were like, well, we could go over this little pass and we could cross the stream early and then cut off like 3 or 4 hours from our trip rather than going all the way up to the normal crossing. And they all agreed. And so we go to cross the river and very quickly realized that was a terrible idea. The stream was way deeper than anyone expected, and the current underneath was stronger than anyone expected. Next thing you know, all of our horses are swimming. I am now on a horse that is not on the ground. It is fully swimming. I'm on its back, and it's getting pushed downstream, and now it's getting pushed. It's panicking. It's getting pushed into the overgrowth. So it's going to panically rush out of the stream, snagging me onto the overgrowth. One of the gauchos falls off of his horse, and he's stuck in his stirrup, and he's drowning. He's like coming up and taking a breath and then going back down and going back underwater. These guys don't know how to swim. The ones that made it across are screaming. Like the one guy's brother is the one that's almost going to drown. The mules are underwater. Their faces are underwater. They're not even like accessing air at this point. And we were with this head gaucho, Juan Trinosco. His name says it all. Yeah. And he was the one I was supposed to find. My only instructions from that billionaire guy were find Juan Trinosco. Initially, so that's who I had originally rode in with, and that's who was in charge of this. And I watched this man. He has that kind of nervous system. You imagine the amount of comfort zone that they don't have, how much growth is required at all times, produces a man like Juan Trinosco. Juan Trinosco is literally the reality of every archetype that we epitomize and that we idolize in cowboys. Like
I know exactly what you're talking about.
This man was
ice water in the veins,
cut out of steel.
Yeah. But
also really warm and kind and a leader. But he immediately dropped into action. He had a lasso, literally, like you would see in a cowboy story. Used the lasso, was able to get the lasso around the neck of the mule that was basically drowning, was able to ease its head up out of water while simultaneously getting other people to make sure that the other pack horses were like contained. The packs themselves had all fallen apart and were going down the river at this point, which we realized once everybody got up and safe and everybody's soaking wet, the horses are all spooked, these mules are broken, they'll never be able to use them for pack uses ever again.
Oh, wow. After
this point, supposedly. Everybody's cold. Some of the gauchos are yelling at me because they think I could probably swim and like need to save, like why was I not saving? Everybody's yelling at each other. And then Juan Trinosco stops everyone. So he goes out and he goes to the water and he grabs like 3 bottles of wine. What we didn't realize is that this billionaire guy, instead of getting all of the supplies that we needed to survive for the next few months, had loaded down all of these mules with wine.
That's all
for himself. Very few supplies. And all those supplies are gone anyway. So then Juan Trinosco, everybody's freaking out. He pulls out the wine, opens up the bottles, and passes them around because now it's getting to be night. We're soaking wet and we're in the Patagonian wilderness. And he proceeds to give the most amazing speech I've ever witnessed another human being give. Didn't understand a word of it and didn't need to. It's like just the presence. And he gave this speech, everybody was quiet, Everybody calmed down. We got a little bit of that warmth of the alcohol in us. And then we made the rest of the trek back to the ranch. We get to the ranch, and the billionaire guy comes out to meet us. We're all bloody. We're still wet. We're now covered in some frost. And he looks at the pack mules. He's like, "Where's all my wine?" Doesn't ask any questions. Doesn't say, "What happened to you guys? What is going on?" Juan says something to him in Spanish that was very flippant and not kind. And he turns around and storms off, and that's the last time I ever saw him. Juan goes back. Juan doesn't live, and he goes back to the village. Next thing I know, this guy's gone. And he's just gone. And suddenly, it's me and a couple other people, and we're there, and he's got this head gaucho that lives on the land with him, who's kind of a sociopath. He's an older man. He's a cowboy. He's always carrying a gun. And basically, we get to a point where we realize that there's no food, that we are not allowed to leave without this guy pointing a gun at us and telling us to go back. We have one bag of dulce de leche, which is basically crystallized milk. That is the only food source we have. At one point in the middle of the night, we decide that we need to eat. So we sneak out and we go steal one of the laying hens, like out from under this armed guy that is basically holding us hostage. And we steal the laying hen and we slaughter it and we cook it up on our little fire and eat it just to keep going. Otherwise, all we've got is this dulce de leche that I'm pretty sure they didn't even know we had. It was like in the underground larder, kind of under the building, just there.
So you're really, really, really in the middle of nowhere, held at gunpoint.
Correct.
In a small area. How long did this go on for?
It was about 10 days.
10 days.
When we finally had this desperate realization that nothing was going to change, that there wasn't any... This was one of the first times in my life where I realized it's like, I am really in a different place right now altogether. If this man would shoot me and no one would ever know, and there'd be no repercussions. There'd be no repercussions whatsoever. Like, that's it. And that's just the name of the game. So we decided that we needed to escape. And in order to escape, the only thing you can do is on horseback, because you're at least one day's full day and night's horseback ride away from the closest semblance of habitation.
Did you know what direction that was in?
Nope. So, and I was with one of the guys, was a very young gaucho, and I expected that he knew. So at the middle of the night, we made sure, we knew he had been drinking, so we thought he was passed out. And we went, and these horses are very loud. These are not the tamest, none of these horses are very tame. Like when they're not wearing saddles, they're basically wild. So catching them is a big ordeal, and it's a loud ordeal. And we went and we had to catch from the massive pin that the horses were in. We had to catch 3 horses, and we stole saddles and bits and whatever we could get. And then we took off across the stream and in what we thought was the direction of town. But we were moving very quickly. We were scared. We were cold. We were hungry. We just went. So then we ride through the night, and we're always nervous. We always are like, because the horses make a lot of noise, the wilderness makes a lot of noise, the wind makes a lot of noise, but you think that you're being followed, and there's that panic. It's like, are we gonna get followed and shot and taken out? And eventually the sun rises and we're up on top of this knoll, like up on top of this hill, and the sun's rising all around us. It's stunningly beautiful. I remember that much. And I remember the gaucho, the one that I thought would know where we were going, just riding in circles, looking out in every direction. And I could see the dread and the worry on his face.
He had no idea where you were.
He had no idea where we were. And so we kind of stood in stasis for a little bit, and then we picked a direction and we moved and we went. And we went for most of that day, and we came over a hill, and there was this little itty bitty stone hut with a herd of goats and one old man and his herd of goats. We get to him. He points in another direction to our right, basically. And we turn that way, and eventually we get back to Juan Trinosco. The young gaucho explains everything to Juan, and Juan takes the horses, and we walk into the town. And at this point, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. I'm supposed to be on this. I'm supposed to be doing this whole internship. I'm supposed to be learning permaculture. I am learning Spanish. That's happening. But I realized at that moment that it's like, well, this really truly is the unknown now. Yeah. It's like the one thing that was my anchor of what I was doing is no longer available. Mm-hmm. I've just been through this whole ordeal. What do I do now? And that's when I decided to go north towards Aconcagua, because I had always had my sights set on the tallest mountain outside of the Himalayas. But I had no money and I had nothing, so I didn't know how I would make that work. And that really is the beginning of a year-long, absolutely wild adventure that involved me being able to climb the tallest mountain outside of the Himalayas and become the youngest person to ever solo it.
Wow.
Which was a wild experience.
You did that right after this?
Correct, right after this. And that took me 20 days and got frostbite.
You were not with a group or with a guide of any sort?
No.
And other than bouldering, you didn't really have any mountaineering experience?
I had done ice climbing, and I knew ice and snow systems too, yes. Okay. So that's, once again, young and naive at this point. I had done some mountaineering, done some ice climbing, knew the rope systems, and had all of the cocky attitude to think that I had everything. And I guess, to be fair, I did have everything I needed, but it was just easy to say, to go forward and push the threshold and not really consider or really concern myself with the possible negative outcomes and just keep one step ahead. And by the time I got to that base camp, that was the highest I'd ever been in my life. That base camp's taller than any of the Rockies.
Jeez.
So I told myself, and I was responsible to myself, I was like, listen, I'm going to take one step forward and just the next step. Mm-hmm. And every single step I take is higher than I've ever been in my life, and I'm going to consider that to be the victory. Because I also witnessed everybody getting rejected. All these people with fancy gear and everything getting rejected by that mountain. And I kept going, and on my summit day, it was negative 55 degrees. There was a 60 mile per hour sustained wind, luckily pushing me into the mountain. And that was luckily the first day in the entire season that the mountain was actually even summitable at all. I got up there, 4 other people, 5 of us made it to that summit that day. I was the first. And when I came back down, I got scared because I couldn't feel my toes. It felt like there was holes in my socks on both sides, my big toes. And I started to panic because I thought I'd have frostbite, which I did. And so I ended up going down the wrong side of a ridge, and I went probably a couple thousand vertical feet down the wrong side of this mountain after summiting a 24,000 foot mountain with no energy, frostbite, completely drained, and had to climb back up.
Oh no, are you serious?
And back over, and finally made it to my tent. Before I could even check on my feet, I had to fill a contractor's trash bag full of snow to put in my vestibule with me that I could start feeding to my camp stove in order to make water. Because I was extreme, not just severe, but extremely dehydrated at that point. Then I took off my shoes, noticed that the whole fronts of my big toes had turned black, and I sat there and I rubbed them vigorously, and I said some prayers, and I was like, please come back to me, toes. I will not push this. I was wearing like the cheapest double plastic boots from the 80s. They were being held together with duct tape, and that's what I got for it. So there's a lot of learning.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, that's a big mountain, and the consequences are real, and climbing it with the cheapest, least ideal gear that you could get your hands on, that was basically all I could afford, has its consequences as well, but I did it, and it worked, and I ended up being the youngest solo ascent. And
I think I've said this to you before, but it is amazing to me that you left such a traumatic experience in Patagonia, enough that a lot of people would have left that fearing for their life, rightly so, and just hold up in a corner, man. Just incapable to function in a normal life because of that trauma. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but the point is I'm comparing that to what you did, which is really the opposite. You went to the next challenge. And so I'm curious, was that intentional? Were you avoiding sitting in the experience that you had just come out of, or was it just, did it feel natural to you just to move on to the next thing?
It's hard in retrospect, because when I think about everything I've learned and all of the behavior patterns that I still embodied then, and the subconscious traumas from childhood, all the stuff that I was just a kid still at that point. It's like all the work that I've done since, there's no question that some of that was playing out. There's no question that there's a part of me that didn't want to dwell in that, but then there was another part of me that has never really been able to dwell in the past very much, and I'm very much part of the gift in this, which is a gift in this case. In terms of running a business, it can become a challenge, is how much I live in the present moment. I'm very much wherever I am in a given moment. I'm not really living in the past. I'm not really living in the future, which has its own challenges when you're scheduling, organizing your reality, like projecting budgets and doing things of that nature were not skills that came naturally to me.
Does being in the present come natural?
Yes.
You've always been that way? So how do you do that because I'm personally curious with the chaos of life that inevitably happens, especially when you run a small business. What techniques or what things do you do to stay present in the midst of all that?
That's a great question. And part of why, when I finally grounded myself, after all the adventures in South America, which there were many more, riding on the sides of trains, like almost going to Peruvian prison, sneaking into Machu Picchu, traveling with a circus, I hitchhiked the entire length of the Andes, got stuck in the rainforest.
Is this all on the same trip?
All on the same trip. Got stuck in the rainforest in the biggest floods that they had in recorded history, in a little thatched hut rainforest village. All sorts of things that happened while I was in South America. And it was a wild adventure. And then I created a whole lifestyle of traveling and teaching after that. The one of the reasons why I decided to ground myself and start a business is because I got to a point where it's like I had a solid career of traveling and teaching. I was helping create yoga festivals, teaching slackline and acrobatic yoga, and doing all of these things. It wasn't a challenge anymore. And I wasn't growing in the ways that my body was craving. And I knew that the thing that I had developed a whole lifestyle around this freedom, that was the same thing that we were just talking about. I had now found a point of atrophy where I had created this comfort zone around expanding myself in all of these different directions, but not grounding myself, not considering starting businesses that then require me to be dedicated and focused and present, eventually starting a family. Things like this were terrifying to me. And so I actually that terror equals me shrinking a comfort zone. So I was building this whole lifestyle. And once it was really there, it was the moment that I realized that the thing that I was avoiding the most suddenly realized was the thing that I needed the most. And that the thing that was scariest to me was no longer, I could throw myself at any third world country, climb mountains, do these things or whatever. It was starting a business, building a home, being dedicated in a way that may take decades of my life to being in one place. And the moment that I recognized that that was the thing that I was avoiding, and also where all of the things that I was craving existed, there was no question. And that was when I didn't know I was starting a chocolate company. I didn't know Mandala Springs. I knew something like this would exist because I always thought about it, but I just knew that I needed to start somewhere. And I moved back to Asheville. I built myself a tiny house. I started a chocolate company, and that happened in a very serendipitous way and made a lot of sense based on other adventures that I had had and other skills that I had developed along the journey.
But you were doing that in the tiny house.
Correct. Yeah. I was doing it in a circus warehouse before the tiny house even existed, actually. So that, it's like one step at a time. Moved into a circus warehouse, helped create the circus warehouse, climbing walls and aerial silks and all sorts of fun stuff. We'd have big events and shows and performances. I would do a lot of circus theater performances and things. But ultimately was grounding myself. And a few other big adventures happened in the process. Somebody'd be like, by the way, I'm buying you a ticket to India. I need you on these 2 documentaries. All your expenses are covered. I just need you there. And I almost said no to that. But
Did you really?
But then I didn't, because I realized, and that led to another wild adventure. That's a whole nother story. I could write books about these things.
You should. Are you going to?
I have, sort of. I've got a lot of it written.
Do you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'd buy the first one.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And part of the reason I was so scared of these things is because the way, this goes back to your question, the way my nervous system is designed and the way that I thrive in that situation. Suddenly I have a manufacturing business. I started making chocolate because I love making chocolate. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize I was going to be creating a commercial kitchen with certified organic kitchen certifications, states, taxes, all of my insurances, standard operating procedures, manufacturing business. And I would have employees, and I'd have budgets, and I'd have marketing, and I would have all of that. Mm-hmm. That was what I was scared of, because those skills forced me to face some of the deepest things that I had avoided.
Yeah.
And I could have just spent the rest of my life doing all the, going from yoga festival to yoga festival, mm-hmm. living on the road, making good money, doing a thing. Mm-hmm. And I would never have had to face the lack of skill and capacity, and also some of the lack of emotional intelligence and grounded intelligence that were required to be able to create something like Mandala Chocolate and Mandala Springs. I mean, to this day, that is the biggest, it's the biggest, not just a slice of humble pie, it's the biggest cake that is continually being shoved down my throat at all times, because for every bit of propensity and skill that I've had in these other things, mm-hmm. I've had to struggle a lot. I've had to make a lot of mistakes, make a lot of people really angry through my lack of boundaries, my lack of proper communication skills, my lack of capacity to really account for the needs of others, mm-hmm. Which then led back to my childhood. I had to really internalize, I had to take care of myself. I had to be very self-contained and very self-actualized as a child, because I wasn't getting any of that from the outside, at least emotionally.
And that takes up everything.
Exactly.
So if that taking up everything, you got nothing for anybody else. Is that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I could have spent that whole life continuing to climb and do all the other things and kept living with that unexpressed. But instead, I built a community and a business that forced me to confront, and continues to force me to confront all of this, and to develop empathy and understanding the way to take care of people's needs, and how, different employees and different people in the community have different needs and different strategies, and to develop nuanced listening tools and these skills that I had never needed. And I could have kept growing in those other ways, and I would have just been shrinking as I was in all of these capacities. These are places where over a decade of that kind of adventure, I had shrunken my comfort zone.
Oh, interesting.
And it required so much effort to continue to step in, but I needed to. It was sink or swim.
And it's, I said earlier, as you were talking about all the stuff that you're doing and interested in, that it really feels like you've integrated your life in a lot of ways. But what you're saying here is that this internal part of yourself was completely disintegrated for years and years and years while you were pursuing all of these other adventures and learning a lot about yourself through that.
Exactly.
And this place in this 80 acres has been part and parcel to bringing that part of yourself back together.
And the chocolate company. And also just the being rooted.
Yeah.
And I
love that visual of being rooted too. And you've said it before that the roots here allow you to experience the world when you travel out in a different way than you did in your 20s and 30s.
Exactly. And so here we are, a good decade at least further, with lots of work to do in all of those arenas that I'm still growing in, and continually being awed at just how deep it goes and how much there's to learn. But now I'm having the capacity to balance and go out. You know, for the first 5 years that I was doing Mandala Springs, I didn't go anywhere. I didn't leave the Southeast and only very rarely left Mandala Springs. And that was necessary. And here we are now. I'm leading retreats internationally again. I'm getting out into the world and I'm doing things, but with that root, with the groundedness, with the service to the bigger project in the process. And that's the fun, is it's like, you know, this place is it's so beautiful with this wild stream and the springs and the forest and the surrounding national forest. Blue Ridge Parkway is just right up the hill.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I mean, you know, I don't necessarily feel like I need to go on vacation from Mandala Springs, but there's the part of me that still really thrives and gets that different perspective when I go out into the world and I go and do something that is pushing my growth zone. But I'm pushing my growth zone in ways that are meaningfully expanding my growth zone, but I'm not trying to put myself in danger. I'm not seeking the trauma zone or anything like that, you know? And life is inherently dangerous. You could walk down a flight of stairs and fall and kill yourself. So it's like you want to live and you want to go and do the things, but I'm just doing it with more wisdom.
Yeah.
And with the mission that this route has given me, then I have the reason to be here tomorrow and the next day. You know, there's a big opportunity. There's a lot that can be healed through the kinds of businesses and lifestyles that this place represents. And it's still such a baby, you know, it's got a lot of growth to get to a point where it's really able to impact culture in the way that I foresee being possible.
Well, you've got a big vision. I think you've got a big heart and a big motor to pursue challenges, which is, you know, it's really cool that we get to have this conversation a second time. I'm going to be thinking about this for several days and processing and integrating it in a lot of different ways. But I want to end with you giving you the opportunity to describe what adventure means to you in your own words. And then we'll wrap it up. And I definitely want people to know how to find you.
Okay.
And how to find the chocolates and how to find, if you want them to, this place in Asheville, tucked here in the mountains. So take it away.
So what adventure means to me is the act of following the opportunity of experiencing the real fullness of the human experience, because there's so many different, you can go on a rock climbing adventure, you can go on a business starting adventure. It's really a perspective that we move from. You know, you don't have to leave your house to be on an adventure. It really truly is a mind state. And I think it's a really important mind state to bring vitality and excitement and health to our lives and to the lives of those around us.
Yeah, love that. Well, tell us how you can be found.
There's lots of different ways. So Mandala Chocolate, my raw organic superfood chocolate company, that's Mandala, Mandala, naturals.com. And that's really special. And there's a lot to check out there. You can read my chocolate bio, which is another adventure story on that website.
Sweet.
Pretty wild story about the chocolate.
Can chocolate be ordered right from the website?
Absolutely.
Great.
And you can find it in a lot of health food stores all around the country. And then this land is called Mandala Springs, Mandala Springs, and mandalaSprings.com. And we're starting a spa here. We've got a sauna. We're building hot tubs. We've got retreat rentals. And I, myself and others lead lots of retreats that really help people to access a lot of the things that we talked about today. That's the essence and the point of this land. Beautiful. So we do lots of retreats. If you look up my name, so Rob Lenfestey has my music online. You can go on Spotify and listen to some of my music. But more fun than that is YouTube. Convergence Lifestyle is my YouTube channel. I've got a bunch of Wim Hof and other breathwork videos where I'm playing all the different instruments, and sometimes I'm like playing nature, like hitting rocks together and smacking logs to make the different instruments. And I produced all the music. I'm a professional music producer, amongst the other things. That's one of my passions. And then did the breath work and get the instruction. And it's really fun. So it's a fun way to access breath work. And I'm going to be doing lots of videos in that channel that cover all of the different holistic strategies that I believe are really important tools that people can choose to pick up for themselves. So Convergence Lifestyle on YouTube is where a lot of that exists.
Yeah, I highly recommend anybody checking that out. The videos are great. I wish we had more time to spend talking about how you got connected with Wim Hof and the stuff that you do with those techniques, but the YouTube channel is a good place for folks to start. So.
Yeah, sounds like we just have to have a part 2 at some point.
No, this is we got to have part 3.
We have to have part 3, exactly.
All right, Robbie, thanks. I appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, thanks for listening. And I sincerely mean that because I'm extremely grateful that you choose to spend this time with me. I don't take it for granted, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you want more content like this, be sure to check out material on my website at ridgelinewealthadvisors.com. That's advisors with an ORS. And sign up for my monthly newsletter, The Money Trail Guide, which you can find on the blog page. Until next time, I hope you pursue your own great adventure.